Imagine your deepest vulnerabilities being weaponized, not by an enemy, but by the person you love and trust the most. In today's video, we explore two chilling accounts of psychological warfare where empathy was used as a weapon. From a partner who monitored every breath to a friend who took control of a medical crisis, these stories reveal the terrifying gray area where love becomes a tool for absolute control. If you've ever felt trapped by someone who claimed to only want what's best for you, stay until the end. And if this resonates, subscribe. These stories could save you from a reality you didn't see coming.
I met Daniel at a friend's birthday party. I'd just gone through a brutal breakup 3 months earlier, the kind that leaves you questioning everything about yourself. My ex had been distant, emotionally unavailable, and I'd spent a year trying to fix something that was already broken. Daniel was different. He listened, really listened. Not the polite nodding kind of listening, but the kind where he'd ask follow-up questions, remember details from conversations we'd had days earlier, notice when my mood shifted. On our second date, I mentioned offhandedly that I'd had a panic attack the week before, something I rarely admitted to anyone. Most people got uncomfortable when I brought up my anxiety, but Daniel leaned in. "That must have been terrifying," he said, his eyes genuinely concerned. "What triggered it, do you know?" I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone, about my childhood, about my father's anger, about how I'd learned to monitor everyone's moods to keep the peace. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer shallow reassurances, he just understood. "You're so strong for carrying all of that," he said when I finished. "Most people would have crumbled, but you're still here, still fighting. That's incredible." I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He'd text me every morning, "How did you sleep? Any anxiety dreams?" And every night before bed. He wanted to know about my day, my feelings, my fears. It felt like the intimacy I'd been starving for. There were small things that felt slightly off, but I dismissed them. Like when I mentioned feeling anxious about a work presentation, and he showed up at my office unannounced with tea and a pep talk. It was sweet, I told myself, thoughtful. Or when I said I was having lunch with an old friend, and he texted me 6 times during the meal. "Just checking in, want to make sure you're okay. I know social situations can be hard for you." I convinced myself he was just attentive, that after my emotionally absent ex, this level of care was what real love looked like. The shift happened so slowly, I couldn't pinpoint when it started. It began with him referencing things I'd told him in confidence, but framing them as concern. I'd mention wanting to go to a concert with friends, and he'd say, "Are you sure that's a good idea? You told me crowds trigger your anxiety. I don't want you to have another panic attack. Why don't we stay in instead? I'll take care of you." At first, I appreciated his memory, his concern. But then I noticed I was saying no to more and more things because he'd planted the seed of doubt. Was I actually anxious about the concert, or was I anxious because he'd told me I should be? Then came the emotional debt. Every time he did something kind, which was often, he'd later reference it when he needed something from me. He'd driven me to the doctor when I was sick, and weeks later, when I wanted to visit my sister for the weekend, he'd said, "I was there for you when you needed me, and now you're just going to leave me alone when I need you?" "You said you were fine with me going," I'd replied, confused. "I am fine with it," he'd said, his voice soft, wounded. "I just thought you'd want to be here for me, but I guess I was wrong about how much I mean to you." The guilt was immediate and crushing. I canceled the trip. My friends started commenting that they didn't see me as much anymore. My sister called less frequently. When I mentioned this to Daniel, he said, "Maybe they're not really your friends if they're not making the effort. I'm the only one who's actually here for you consistently." He had a way of making isolation feel like my choice, like a natural consequence of other people's failures rather than his orchestration. I started keeping things from him, small things at first, a lunch with a coworker, a phone call with my mom, but he always found out. He'd check my location on the app we shared, for safety, he'd said when we set it up. He'd see my texts when I left my phone on the table. He'd ask casual questions that revealed he knew more than he should. "How was lunch with Rebecca?" he'd ask, even though I hadn't mentioned it. "How did you know about that? You left your calendar open on your laptop. I wasn't snooping, I just saw it." But it felt like snooping. It felt like surveillance disguised as care. The gaslighting started around month 6. I told him I felt suffocated, that I needed more space, more time with my friends. He looked at me like I'd stabbed him. "Suffocated?" he repeated. "I've done nothing but support you. I've been there through your anxiety, your panic attacks, your insecurities, and this is how you thank me by saying I suffocate you? That's not what I meant. No, I get it. I'm too much. I care too much. I should be more like your ex, right? Emotionally distant? Is that what you want?" I found myself backtracking, apologizing, reassuring him that I appreciated everything he did. The conversation ended with me comforting him about my own feelings. It became a pattern. Every time I tried to express discomfort, he'd flip it. My concerns became attacks on his character. My boundaries became evidence of my ungratefulness. "After everything I sacrificed for you," became his favorite phrase. He'd catalog his sacrifices, the times he'd stayed up late talking me through my anxiety, the social events he'd skipped to be with me, the energy he'd spent managing my emotions. "Do you know how exhausting it is to be with someone as high maintenance as you?" he said once during a fight. "I don't complain, but sometimes I wish you'd acknowledge how much I do for you." I started believing I was the problem, that my needs were too much, that I should be grateful anyone would put up with me at all. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. I'd look at him across the dinner table, this man who claimed to love me, who knew every intimate detail of my inner world, and feel completely alone. But when I'd try to articulate that feeling, he'd cite example after example of his devotion, his care, his empathy. "How can you feel alone when I'm right here?" he'd ask, genuinely confused. "I think you need to see your therapist more. This sounds like your anxiety talking." And I'd wonder if he was right. Maybe I was being irrational. Maybe my perception was distorted. The moment of clarity came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. I was having coffee with my friend Maya, one of the few friends I had left. I'd been careful not to mention Daniel too much, because I knew she didn't like him, though she'd never said so explicitly. Halfway through our conversation, my phone buzzed. "Daniel, where are you? You said you'd be home by now. I'm worried." I texted back that I'd lost track of time, that I'd be home soon. Another buzz. "I just need to know you're safe. Can you send me your location?" I opened the app to share my location, and Maya said quietly, "Does he always do that?" "Do what?" "Track you, check on you, need to know where you are." "He worries about me," I said defensively. "It's sweet." Maya set down her coffee. "Is it? Or does it feel like he doesn't trust you?" The question hit me like cold water. "He knows I have anxiety," I said. "He's just making sure I'm okay." Or he's making sure you're not doing anything he doesn't approve of. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because the truth was, I did feel monitored. I did feel like I was always one wrong move away from disappointing him. "Listen," Maya said gently, "I'm just going to say this once and then I'll drop it, but the way he talks to you, the way he makes you justify your time, your friends, your feelings, that's not love, that's control." I left the coffee shop shaking.
I drove home in silence, Maya's words echoing in my head. When I walked in, Daniel was waiting. "You were gone for 3 hours," he said. "I was worried sick." And for the first time, instead of apologizing, I said, "I was having coffee with a friend. I don't need to report my every movement to you." His face changed. "Report? That's what you think I'm doing? I was worried because I care about you. But fine, next time something happens to you, don't expect me to drop everything." "Nothing's going to happen to me. I'm an adult." "An adult who has panic attacks in parking lots," he shot back. "An adult who can barely function without me talking you through every crisis. You're welcome, by the way." The mask had slipped. I saw it clearly for the first time. The calculation behind the concern, the control behind the care. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about losing his grip on me. Setting boundaries after that was terrifying. Every time I asserted myself, he'd escalate. He'd cry, rage, threaten to leave, then beg me to stay. He'd apologize and promise to change, then, days later, revert to the same patterns. I called Maya, then my sister, then a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse. Each conversation was like turning on a light in a dark room. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. I was being manipulated by someone who'd learned my vulnerabilities and used them against me. Leaving took 2 months of planning. I moved out while he was at work, blocked his number, and stayed with my sister. He tried everything to get me back. Texts from new numbers, emails, showing up at my work. Each message was a variation of the same theme. I was making a mistake. I'd never find anyone who understood me like he did. I'd regret this, but I didn't. I met Lauren at a support group for people dealing with chronic illness. I'd been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition 6 months earlier, and I was struggling. Physically, emotionally, financially. Everything felt like it was falling apart. Lauren had been in remission for 3 years. She was vibrant, confident, and she approached me after the meeting. "I remember what it was like in the beginning," she said. "The fear, the uncertainty. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." She gave me her number, and I took it, grateful for the lifeline. We started texting daily. She'd check in on my symptoms, my doctor's appointments, my medication side effects. She'd send me articles about treatment options, recipes for anti-inflammatory diets, links to clinical trials. It felt like having a mentor who truly understood. "You don't have to go through this alone," she'd say. "I've been where you are. Let me help." Within weeks, she was driving me to appointments, helping me organize my medication schedule, even coming over to cook meals when I was too exhausted to stand. I felt lucky to have found her. There were small moments that felt slightly off, like when I mentioned I was feeling better one week and she seemed almost disappointed, or when another member of the support group invited me to coffee and Lauren said, "Be careful with her. She's not as supportive as she seems. I've seen her judge people who aren't sick enough." I trusted Lauren's assessment. She knew these people better than I did.
The shift was gradual. Lauren started suggesting I needed more help than I was getting. "Your doctor doesn't seem very aggressive with treatment," she'd say. "Maybe you should switch. I can recommend someone." When I'd hesitate, she'd add, "I'm just worried about you. I don't want you to end up like I did, wasting years with the wrong doctors." I switched doctors at her recommendation. The new doctor was more aggressive, prescribing medications that made me sicker. When I mentioned this to Lauren, she said, "It gets worse before it gets better. You have to trust the process." She started referencing all the things she'd done for me. The rides, the meals, the emotional support. "I've rearranged my entire life to help you," she said once. "The least you can do is trust my judgment." I felt guilty for questioning her. She began isolating me from the support group. "Those people don't really understand what you're going through," she'd say.
They're not as sick as you are. They don't get it like I do. When I mentioned wanting to go to a group meeting without her, she'd say, "Of course, if you don't value my company, go ahead. I just thought we had something special." I stopped going to the meetings unless she came with me. My family started expressing concern. My sister said, "You seem really dependent on Lauren. Is that healthy?" I defended Lauren fiercely. "She's the only one who understands what I'm going through. You don't get it because you're not sick." Lauren had a way of positioning herself as the only person who truly cared, while everyone else was ignorant, insensitive, or unsupportive. And I believed her. The gaslighting intensified when I started feeling worse, not better. I told Lauren I thought the new medication wasn't working. She looked at me with concern. "Are you sure it's the medication, or is it your anxiety? You know stress makes your symptoms worse." "I think it's the medication. I didn't have these side effects before." "Side effects are normal," she said firmly. "You're just not used to being on effective treatment. Give it more time." But I felt worse every day. I lost weight, couldn't sleep, developed tremors. When I called my doctor to discuss changing medications, Lauren was furious. "You're self-sabotaging," she said. "This is what you do. You get scared and give up. That's why you're not getting better. You don't follow through." I started doubting myself. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was giving up too easily. Then she started using her own suffering as leverage. "Do you know how hard it is for me to watch you struggle?" she'd say. "It brings up all my own trauma from when I was sick, but I do it because I care about you." When I suggested maybe she needed a break from helping me, she'd say, "So now you're abandoning me? After everything I've done for you? That's really hurtful." Every conversation became a trap. If I expressed my feelings, I was hurting her. If I questioned her advice, I was ungrateful. If I wanted space, I was abandoning her. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I'd sit in my apartment, sick and exhausted, and feel completely isolated despite Lauren's constant presence. But when I tried to articulate this, she'd cite example after example of her devotion. "How can you feel alone when I'm literally here every day?" she'd ask. "I think your illness is affecting your judgment. You're not thinking clearly." And I'd wonder if she was right. Maybe my brain was foggy from the disease. Maybe I was being paranoid. The moment of clarity came when I ended up in the emergency room. I'd been on Lauren's recommended medication for 4 months, and my body was shutting down. My liver enzymes were critically elevated. The ER doctor looked at my chart and said, "How long have you been on this medication?" 4 months. "And your doctor didn't monitor your liver function?" "I don't know." Lauren said. I stopped. Why was I citing Lauren instead of my doctor? The ER doctor looked confused. "Who's Lauren?" "My friend. She has the same condition. She recommended this doctor and this medication." The doctor's expression shifted. "Your friend is not a medical professional. This medication requires regular monitoring. You could have died." The words hit me like a physical blow. I was admitted for 3 days. Lauren tried to visit, but I told the nurses I didn't want visitors. I needed space to think. Lying in that hospital bed, I replayed the last year. Every decision I'd made had been filtered through Lauren's opinions. Every relationship I distanced myself from had been at her suggestion. Every doubt I'd had about treatment had been dismissed by her insistence. She'd positioned herself as my savior while slowly poisoning my judgment. When I got out of the hospital, I called my sister. I told her everything. The medications, the isolation, the constant guilt. She listened, then said, "You need to cut ties with her, completely." "But she's been there for me," I said. "She's been controlling you," my sister interrupted. "There's a difference." Setting boundaries with Lauren was brutal. When I told her I needed space, she spiraled.
She called me dozens of times, left voicemails crying about how much she'd sacrificed, how ungrateful I was, how I was abandoning her when she needed me most. "I gave up my life for you," she said in one message, "and this is how you repay me?" I blocked her number, then her emails, then her social media. Each block felt like removing a chain. I found a new doctor, one Lauren didn't know about. I rejoined the support group without telling her. I reconnected with my family and friends. The guilt was suffocating at first, but slowly, with therapy and distance, I started to see the pattern clearly. She hadn't been helping me, she'd been creating dependence. I've been Lauren-free for 18 months now. My health has improved, my relationships have healed, and I've learned to trust my own instincts again.
Here's what you need to understand if you're living through something similar. The long road to recovery starts with recognizing the pattern. True empathy doesn't come with conditions. It doesn't require constant gratitude or compliance. It doesn't isolate you from other sources of support. If someone's care feels like surveillance, it probably is. Self-compassion is essential. You didn't see it because you weren't supposed to. These manipulations work precisely because they're disguised as love. Forgiving yourself for trusting someone who seemed trustworthy isn't weakness, it's part of healing. What to look for in future relationships. Watch for partners who respect your boundaries without making you feel guilty, who encourage your independence rather than your dependence, who celebrate your support system instead of dismantling it, who see your vulnerability as something to honor, not exploit. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. And know that recognizing the pattern is the hardest part. Everything after that is reclaiming yourself, one boundary at a time. Thanks for listening.